everyone, and welcome back to The Winning Agenda. I'm Jesse Muirman-Marshall. Today, as promised in the last few videos, we're going to finally be taking a look at the Water Sorcerer. This is an exciting deck that I've been putting together, gathering as many sweet foils as I can over the last couple of weeks, and I'm really excited to take a dive in and show you the deck. So here we have all the spells in the deck laid out. Of course, the Sorcerer avatar, I'm using the box topper version that comes in the alpha box topper, but if you've got a pledge pack and you've opened it, you might want to use your Sorcerer that's signed by Eric. One of the advantages to using the box topper as opposed to the pledge pack one is that it actually has the rules text on it. So while the game is a bit newer, that's the one that I'll be using as I'm teaching people. But I think once people are familiar with the Sorcerer and what it does, I'll definitely switch over to using that pledge pack one because it's some sweet art. So anyway, we'll dive into the actual deck itself. I know I keep saying dive, perhaps a little bit of a water-related pun there. We'll dive into the deck itself and have a look at some of the key combos, the key synergies in the spellbook section. But of course, when you're doing a sorcery deck tech, you can't complete it without talking about the sites. And in this particular deck with water, the sites and bodies of water are obviously a really integral part of what you're trying to do. And we've got a couple of key combos that utilize Riptide, which really is the core of the deck in many ways, both in terms of how it can win the game, but also the synergizing with sites like Free City and Bottomless Pit. There's a couple of key combos that allow us to trade really profitably in the mid game, because if you can use a Riptide to pull a target minion of your opponent's into a Bottomless Pit, you, for 2 mana, basically get to remove any non-airborne minion from the board, and you get to draw a card again for Riptide to replace itself. And, you know, the Bottomless Pit is really free in a lot of ways. So in order to do that, by free I mean Bottomless Pit doesn't cost you a separate card. So you've really spent 2 mana but no cards to remove potentially your opponent's best minions. So little trades like that are profitable in terms of card advantage are things that this deck is trying to do well. In order to pull that off though, you have to be able to make Bottomless Pit a water site, which we'll come to in the site section when we're talking about Floodplain, but there's also a couple of elements in the spell book that allow us to do that too. So I might start off with the powerful water card, Atlantean Fate. So Atlantean Fate allows you to, like any other aura as a default ability, play it at the intersection of 4 locations on the board. And when you play it at the intersection of 4 locations, all of them become flooded and everything there gets submerged, meaning that you get to kill any minions there that don't have submerge. You also get to permanently make those sites into basic water sites, which means your opponent doesn't get other types of threshold from them. So this is a great way for 5 mana to remove some things from your opponent's side of the board. You can also play it at the intersection if they've come onto your side of the board and onto your sites, at the intersection of 2 of your sites and 2 of theirs if you need to, because you turning your own sites into basic water sites isn't so much of a drawback. So doing that and then leaving 2 of their sites permanently flooded also means that you've got places to attack with your Anui Undine and your Giant Shark, which are effectively both waterbound in terms of if you want Anui to actually be dealing any damage. So Atlantean Fate, a key option for flooding the other side of the board. Some other key cards in the deck and little combos that I want to talk about, because this deck is sort of my thought process behind putting together this deck was to try and take the current water card pool, which is probably the weakest color in sorcery at the moment in the alpha set, and to try and get as much value out of it as possible and push the power level and the little combos here and there to see if I can put together a winning formula. And certainly in my testing so far, the deck's not the most powerful deck, but utilizing the card advantage and the power of Riptide that I described a little bit earlier, plus all these other combos that I'll go through shortly, does allow you to grind out some incremental advantage, and you do have a few powerful finishes that we'll come to as well. So Polar Bears and Polar Explorers both have this similar ability to access the opponent's side of the board from your side of the board. So Polar Explorer says allied units here, meaning it and other allied units, can move as if the top and bottom edges of the realm were connected, and Polar Bears can simply move as if the top and bottom edges of the realm were connected. So how is that useful for us in a slower, more controlling deck? Well, what we're planning to do with the Polar Bears and the Polar Explorers, other than having relatively cheap minions that can block in a pinch if we need them to, and trade with things like opposing Spectral Stalkers that try and rush us, is that they can carry the Maddening Bells onto our opponent's side of the board very easily. So if we play, for instance, a Polar Bears or a Polar Explorers on turn 3, then on turn 4 we can play a Maddening Bells on them and just carry the Maddening Bells onto our opponent's side of the board. That's then a bit difficult for our opponents to bring back to our side of the board. You know, it takes multiple turns usually for them to kill the Polar Explorers or the Polar Bears, pick up the bells, and get away from their avatar so that the Maddening Bells is no longer affecting them. So that's a little combo that we kind of use to try and slow the game down, as well as having these minions that can attack if we need them to early, but can also block and trade and slow the game down if needed. So Polar Bears and Polar Explorers in the 2-drop slot, and then we've also got these Unland Eels, which are sort of another... It's a powerful effect, but it can be hard to pull off. So it says, whenever Unland Eel submerges, it may drag another minion down with it. And one of the problems with that is that your opponent can either just avoid the Unland Eel, or because it's only 2 power, by the time they get onto its site, they can just kill the Unland Eel. So really what you have to do with it is drag your opponent's minions onto the same site that it's on while it's untapped on your turn, and then submerge it and kill the opposing minion by submerging it along with it. Riptide is the perfect way to do that. So if you can have your Unland Eel untapped and there's any adjacent enemy minion, they're always in danger of being riptided onto the Unland Eel square and then submerged with the Unland Eel. So it's just another way, along with Bottomless Pit, that you can use the threats that water can offer to utilize Riptide's ability to move your opponent's minions and actually kill them. One of my favorite little combos in the deck is, and probably the most powerful, is a double unique combo, and it's Plague of Frogs and Pnakotic Manuscript. So Plague of Frogs says summon 7 frog tokens. You can summon them to any of your sites, and those are 0 power frogs, so they can't attack. Well, they can, but they don't deal any damage, and really what they're mostly used for is chump blocking. Pnakotic Manuscript, though, if you put all your 7 frogs submerged underneath one of your sites, they can pretty much stay there safely until you draw the manuscript, and then you play the manuscript into the hands of one of your frogs underwater, and it says, tap, reveal your topmost spell and draw it. Bearer takes damage equal to the spell's cost. So all of our spells cost at least 1 mana, which means that if a frog taps to use the manuscript, it's definitely going to die, because the top card of our spellbook is going to have at least 1 mana cost. When the frog dies, the manuscript will be dropped, and then the next frog can pick it up. So if we've played Plague of Frogs, we can actually draw 7 cards using Pnakotic Manuscript. All the frogs will die, but we'll have 7 fresh cards in hand. So it's another way that we can grind out a little bit of card advantage, or quite a lot of card advantage in that case, if we manage to get this combo together. In the site portion of the deck, there's also Tadpole Pool, which is a similar effect to Plague of Frogs, but rather than summoning 7, it summons 3 frogs. So not quite as good as a draw 7, but we'll take a draw 3, I think, if it comes pretty much for free, not at the cost of a card, off one of our sites. The other card I want to mention in the low-cost minion pool is the Tufted Turtles, which works well with Pnakotic Manuscripts. You can tap to draw a card a turn, and the Tufted Turtles will prevent the damage, because you prevent the first time that it would take damage each turn. So you just tap it, use the manuscript, draw a card, and the turtles will live to fight another day, or draw another day, or read another day, whatever they want to do. So the turtles are a good combo that way, but they're also, as a 3-cost 2-power minion, that's a bit more difficult for your opponent to remove because they have to hit it twice. They're just a bit of an effective blocker that you can place on your side of the board and slow down the game a little bit. So they've got that double utility in this particular deck. Fey Changeling, of course, also comes in the 3-drop slot. It's just a great way to slow your opponent down as a speed bump. It can be played on any site, including your opponent's, and you can return a minion on that site to its owner's hand. And this was, as I mentioned in a previous video, I think in the box opening when I opened this foil, got a special place in my heart now as well, because of course this was the recreation that I did for the Sorcery Alpha Lo-Fi Recreate a Card contest, and it won me a few booster packs through that. Thanks again to Simon and Chase for running that at the Eric Curiosa team. Looking forward to opening a few more packs from those prizes, and Fey Changeling will always have a special place in my heart because of that. It's also a really good bounce spell. We've got Megamoeba as well, which is potentially a threat that can get out of hand. It grows and it extends itself as you move it. You can use Riptide as well in a pinch to move your Megamoeba and have it grow an extra power with that your opponent doesn't expect. but in general it's just sort of a 3-cost minion that can grow reasonably large as time goes on. You've got things like Maelström and Undertow in the site deck as well, in the Atlas, that allow you to move this extra steps for free, and that can then allow you to grow its power a bit more quickly than once per turn. Font of Life is a nice little control life gain card that just lets us slow the game down. If someone tries to rush us, we heal an amount equal to the number of sites in our body of water that our Sorcerer is sitting in. So as long as we're playing out water sites, which we are because we're a mono water deck, then we're going to be gaining a reasonable amount of life by the time we play the Font of Life. So then we get out of the sort of low cost area. So we're going through Riptide and our other low-cost minions. We should also talk a little bit about our ramp, I suppose, as well. So we've got Aquamarine Core and 2 Mix Aquas. I'll show off this beautiful foil Mix Aqua, which I was very happy to pick up. Probably my favorite card in the deck in terms of how beautiful it looks. That gorgeous Elvira Shakarova art, like all of the mixes. The eyes glowing on the character there. And then the glow on the bauble itself that she's filling with water. It's just such a beautiful card. So very glad to have picked that one up. Just make sure we get it in good focus. I'll give you a very careful, gentle look at the back of it as well for that full art. So you can see just a little bit more of the watery sort of landscape that she's playing on whilst she's filling this up from the shell. And you can see a little bit more of that shell at the top of the picture as well, which gets covered up a little bit by the title line on the front of the card. So yes, a very gorgeous one that I am happy to have in the deck. I might show you a couple of the other foils as well while we're looking at foils. Of course, the famous giant shark, which I might as well talk about now that we're looking at it. So it's a submerged, waterbound, 5-cost, 5-power minion, and 5 cost for 5 power is very efficient as far as sorcery minions go. 5 power is very high. It, trades very well with most of the other minions that you'll see played in most decks. And it's got this ability, whenever another unit enters or moves between sites in this body of water, Giant Shark moves to that unit to fight it. So if you can, again, use Riptide to drag something into your body of water whilst Giant Shark is in play, then the Giant Shark will immediately move to that creature, that minion, and strike it. It'll also move to and strike avatars, so this can be a great way to finish the game too. It is waterbound, so you need to have ways to flood your opponent's sites if you want to be attacking with the Giant Shark, but a lot of the time it's used as a removal spell and something that fights very well to defend our territory, and in a pinch we can use it to deal some damage as well. I'll show you the back of the shark. Shout out to Louis at Kitchen Table TCG and Josh from Hometown TCG, who put out a call to buy all the giant sharks. Josh is in love with giant sharks, and you can see why. Foil Giant Shark is a fantastic card, and it's a beautiful piece of artwork. It captures the terror of being chased by a giant shark. So there we have it. That is the giant shark. Next up on the foils, I just want to quickly give you a look at Drown and Anui Undine. So we haven't talked about Anui. She is the other 5-cost minion in the deck that we use as a bit of a finisher. So like Giant Shark, she's effectively waterbound in that she's got +1 power for each site in her body of water, and she starts off as 0 power. So if you attack your opponent, you can move out of your water sites and attack your opponent, but she'll be 0 power because there'll be 0 sites in her body of water. But if you can make your opponent's site that you're attacking into a water site, then she will be pumped up by that site and all of yours that are connected to it that are also water sites. So she can attack pretty reasonably, on turn 6 or 7 for, 7 damage plus the 1 damage from the water site that you flooded on your opponent's side. So you can be attacking for 7 or 8, and she's a great way for this deck to actually deal its damage and close out the game. So Anui is the main way that we're looking to close out games, and of course this foil just looks absolutely outstanding. Great art from Tony Suldo, and you can see the rocks and the waves crashing on the shore that are revealed there in the full art version on the back of the foil. So other than Anui, we've also got here another card that I haven't yet discussed, which is Drown. It's just a one of. It submerges a minion or artifact if able. It's a way that we can get, if our opponent does manage to carry out Maddening Bells back onto our side of the board, you can get rid of it in a pinch by submerging it using this. Otherwise, you can just use it as a straight up removal spell for any enemy minion that comes onto your side of the board. And doesn't that art, the 3D look of how opaque the character is, and then the translucency of the background, and the reflectiveness of the background is just outstanding. So I am very much in awe. As a lot of people have commented, the blues on these foils in real life look absolutely outstanding. So a lot of these water foils that are full of deep blue just look absolutely brilliant. So I'll have a look at the back here. And there's the full art. Beautiful artwork. So a couple of other cards just to close out the sort of deck tech portion. We've got a couple of uniques in the 4-drop slot. So we've got Ruler of Thul, Captain Baldassare, and Lord of Unland. They've each got a really powerful effect. So Lord of Unland can give, it's got Submerge, it's a 4-cost 3-power minion that can give +1 power to each other minion, other ally, so including a sorcerer, occupying Lord of Unland's body of water. So that's one way that we can get our frogs that we get from Plague of Frogs. If we don't happen to draw the Pnakotic Manuscript, we can get them to be attacking for 1 with the Lord of Unland, which can be helpful. You know, that can mean that the frogs can potentially unsubmerge and take out a big minion that's on the site that they're submerged under, or they can just attack onto your opponent's side of the board for 1, as long as you've managed to turn one of your opposing sites into a water site to make it part of the body of water. Ruler of Thul, of course, one of the iconic Frank Frazetta artworks in the Alpha set. It has charge, and it says allies can move as if the top and bottom edges of the realm were connected. So it's just like the Polar Explorers and the Polar Bears. It's another one that can carry the Maddening Bells over to our opponent. And other allies occupying sites on either the north or south end of the realm have +1 power. It's also got charge, as I said, so it's attacks for 3, and it can attack and move on the turn you play it. So you can have the Ruler of Thul out, and you can attack on the turn that it comes into the realm, which can be powerful. We know that charge is a really strong effect. It's just a way to be more interactive than what your opponent expects, and a bit more explosive. Lastly, we've got Captain Baldassare, who is a 4-cost 3-power mortal. Like the others, 4-cost 3-power, water, tends to get slightly lower power than the other elements, but the effects you could see on Ruler of Thul, very powerful, on Lord of Unland, very powerful, buffing the whole team. And Captain Baldassare similarly says, whenever Captain Baldassare attacks a unit or site, the defending player discards the topmost 3 spells of their spellbook. You may cast each of those spells once this turn, ignoring threshold requirements. So you're effectively drawing 3 off the top of your opponent's deck, and you're able to play them regardless of their threshold requirement, as long as you've got the mana. So if you play Captain Baldassare early, he's a great one to get out with a mix Aqua, for example, on turn 2. So turn 2, you play Baldassare on your middle site, then the following turn you attack. And he doesn't have to successfully attack, it's whenever he attacks a unit or site, so you just get in there, and you're then on your turn 3, or perhaps turn 4, and you're able to play cards from the top of your opponent's deck, and you get the choice of 3. So Baldassare is another great way to get some card advantage, and if he's not stopped, that really can get out of control. So the very last card that I'll mention before we get onto the sites is Great Old One. So this is one of the unrevealed cards that we didn't get to play with before they were added to Curiosa.io upon Alpha's actual delivery. And it's an 8-cost 16-power minion, so it's the biggest minion in the Alpha set. It's got Submerge, so 16 power. It's got Submerge, and it says Genesis permanently flood the entire realm, including voids. So that means that everything is flooded, even spaces that don't yet have sites in them, which won't be many by the time this comes out. And if further sites are placed in those, they also become part of the body of water. But crucially, it permanently floods your opponent's sites, which means your Anui Undines are huge, and it means anything like your giant sharks that's waterbound or is more powerful on water can attack onto your opponent's side of the board with impunity. So Great Old One, just another great finisher and top end of our curve to allow us to do really powerful things in the late game. And it's also another reward for getting up to 8 mana. So we've got Island Leviathan, which gives us a reward for getting to 8 water threshold and turns itself into an 8-power monster. And Great Old One being another really powerful thing to play for 8 mana means that we're more rewarded for going to those higher mana levels as well. So that's a little look at the Water Sorcerer spellbook. Hope you enjoyed that run through, and we're now just going to take a little bit of a dive into the sites. So the Atlas portion of this deck is really quite compact and quite self-contained, and everything synergizes really nicely with each other. So as I mentioned, we've got a couple of sites that allow for mobility. When I was talking through the spellbook, I was talking about Riptide, but also things like Megamoeba, Unland Eel, things that benefit from being able to move our minions around more on our turn than our opponent might expect. So Maelström is the more powerful, unique version of this effect. And it says, at the start of your turn, you may pull in each minion in this body of water one step. So that allows you to pull your opponent's minions in as long as they're in a body of water already at the start of your turn. It allows you to pull them one step closer to the Maelström. It allows you to pull in your Unland Eel. It allows you to pull in your Megamoeba that's already in play and get an extra counter on it. But it also allows you to pull things into, for example, your Bottomless Pit. So it means that if Maelström is on the board, particularly if it's on your starting site, your opponent needs to be very careful about how they maneuver around in your body of water, lest they inadvertently end up drowning or falling down a bottomless pit or being dragged down by an Unland Eel or one of the many other threats. It also can allow you to move an opposing minion at the start of your turn within a body of water where there's a giant shark. So if your opponent is trying to avoid being eaten by the shark, it can actually be very difficult when a Maelström is on the battlefield and you're actually getting that extra ability to move for free an opposing minion at the start of your turn and to force that movement. Undertow is our other movement-based site. So it says Genesis, staying within this body of water, move target unit one step. So this can be used, after you've played Great Old One and the whole realm is flooded, you can use these to move your opposing avatar closer so that, it's easier for you to finish them off and kill them when they're at death's door. You can use it to move your minions closer to their side of the board. You can use it to evade enemy attacks or enemy threats, and you can again use it to force your opponent to move onto the site where your Unland Eel is, or into the range of a giant shark or one of your other threats, or your Bottomless Pit, as long as it's flooded. So Undertow, and in some ways it's more effective because you can use it with Floodplain, unlike Maelström, because Maelström triggers at the start of your turn. You haven't yet had a chance to use your Floodplain, but you can use your Floodplain to flood an opposing site unexpectedly, and then use Undertow now that that minion that's on that flooded site is within the same body of water. Undertow can drag it in a way that your opponent might not expect, for instance, onto your Bottomless Pit. So Undertow works very well, just like Riptide, in that it can allow you to drag things into your threats when your opponent doesn't want them to move. So I've spoken a lot about Free City and Bottomless Pit, and these are the three sites that we use. They're not water sites, so we have to actually be flooding them to make them part of our body of water and to make them water sites for a lot of our effects like Riptide that can only drag things onto water sites against their will. But we have a few ways to do that, some of which I spoke about in the in the spellbook section, including Great Old One. You can't use Atlantean Fate on these because it will turn them into basic water sites and then they won't have their ability. But what you can use is Floodplain on your turn, which we'll come to in a minute. But Bottomless Pit basically says whenever a non-airborne minion enters this site, kill it. Not unit, because it doesn't kill avatars. But whenever a non-airborne minion enters this site, kill it. So if you can make this a water site and then use Riptide to drag your opposing minions onto this, they will die if they don't have airborne. So it's a great way to get that removal, as I discussed earlier, without really having to spend an effective card because Riptide replaces itself with the draw a card. Free City allows you to accomplish a similar thing. We've got 2 copies of Bottomless Pit. It's an elite, so we can't play more. So if we want a 3rd copy of the effect, we go to Free City, which has a similar effect, but it can only attack and kill something that has 3 power or less. So it's a slightly less useful version, but of course it can kill airborne minions, which can be useful. So it's an alternate of the same effect that we use to both kill airborne minions and to kill smaller minions. We've then got a couple of other uniques in the Atlas. So Mirror Realm allows us to copy any other nearby site, which is super important when so many of our sites have powerful effects. We can get another Tadpole Pool that I'll talk about now. We can get another Maelström, another Undertow, any of those powerful maneuverability and movement sites, or we can get another Bottomless Pit if that's something that we really want. But Tadpole Pool is probably the #1 target for it, because as long as we've got 3 water threshold, which we'll very often have, when it comes in, so as a Genesis ability, we can summon 3 submerged frog tokens for free. And in combination with Pnakotic Manuscripts that I talked about in the spellbook section, that's a draw 3 cards, you know, and that's a hugely powerful effect to get off a site. It doesn't cost us any mana, it doesn't cost us any tempo, and we can just bank those 3 submerged frog tokens on this site, and when we draw the manuscript, we just get to draw 3, which is massive for 2 mana. We've then got Island Leviathan. Actually, before I talk about the Leviathan, I have a quick chat about Floodplain, because that's really relevant to the Bottomless Pit that I talked about a moment ago. So Floodplain says, once on your turn, you may flood an adjacent site this turn, and it's an exceptional, so we've got 3 copies. So basically, as long as we've got a floodplain adjacent to our Bottomless Pit, we've always got the option to make Bottomless Pit or Free City a water site on our turn. It then becomes part of the body of water, so we can move things around with Undertow, because the Bottomless Pit will be part of the body of water, so we can move something onto it. We can also drag things onto it with Riptide, because it's now a water site for Riptide's purposes. So Floodplain, a really key site for enabling the Bottomless Pit Riptide plays. Island Leviathan similarly benefits from Floodplain, because as long as we make our Free City and our Bottomless Pits water sites, they produce water threshold, and when we get up to water threshold 8, we get to transform the Island Leviathan into a monster, and we place a flooded rubble underneath. So we lose a mana at that point. The Island Leviathan's no longer a site, but it's an 8 power minion. And 8 power minions are pretty beefy and pretty big. Your opponent obviously sees it coming. You know, it's an onboard trick that they are aware of, and they might save up a removal spell for it, but it's still something that you get effectively for free, because you get to use this site for such a long time. Once you're at 8 mana, losing a site in exchange for an 8 power minion that doesn't actually cost you any mana to summon is a pretty good trade. So Island Leviathan, a very powerful one for us to have there on the board as a late game threat. And then we've just got 6 basic rivers to round out the spellbook. So these are all variants of the water basic site. So we've got 4 winter rivers and a spring river and a summer river, simply because those are the foils that I've opened of the rivers so far. But they are, of course, very beautiful artwork from Matt Tame as well. Sorry, Matt Tames. And then the winter river was the box topper version. So it's got that nice little subtle Alpha logo in the foiling on the left hand side. I hope you enjoyed today's look at the Water Sorcerer deck. It's one that, as I said, I have tried to get the most out of the weakest element probably in Alpha, and I think it's succeeded to a large extent. I think there's enough little synergies, there's enough going on, there's enough late game threats for you to build to that you've actually got a cohesive game plan, which is not something that I've ever felt with many water decks before, and it makes me really excited to dive in and play this one. So thank you very much for watching. I've been Jesse for The Winning Agenda. I really appreciate everybody's support. I want to say we've had a few more members sign up in the last little while, supporting the channel with that $3 a month contribution. I really appreciate that. You know, everything, camera, everything else, you know, are things that we've got to help the channel be as good as it can and bring you great content. And every little bit of support through membership and just through viewership both makes me feel more motivated to keep coming and making more content. It's great to see people watching it. That's what drives me and makes me keep coming back. But that little bit of financial support just helps as well to pay for the little peripherals here and there with the channel. So thank you, members. We also say thank you to our members in other ways through our monthly giveaways. So we're giving away the Occult Ritual from the Pledge Pack this month in a couple of days' time at the end of July. And then we've got some of the other Pledge Pack cards coming up in the next couple of months too, including the signed Sorcerer. So do jump on and support the channel if you can. If you simply enjoy the content and just watch, please keep doing that. As I said, that's what motivates me to keep coming back and making content. And if you have ideas for things you'd like to see, please let me know. We've still got the Avatar of Earth deck showcase, which will be similar to this, once I get a chance to put that together. And I've got a foil Death Speaker arriving soon. I know I've already done the Death Speaker deck showcase, but I'll probably show that off as well when I do the Avatar of Earth one. So anyway, thanks everyone for watching. I've been Jesse for The Winning Agenda, and we'll see you next time. Cheers.